Hello, welcome to Harry Cole Saves the West, the show where American grit meets British backbone. Manchester, England, Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, turned to horror. A car ploughed into worshippers outside a synagogue, then the stabbing rampage began. 2 dead, and the terrorist Jihad Al-Shamie getting justice on the spot from the brave cops who ran towards the carnage. But British Jews had dreaded this day. Since Hamas's October 7th massacre, anti-Semitism in Britain has exploded. 4 incidents a day reported. There are synagogues like fortresses, kids bullied in schools, patients even refused treatment. Campuses are a no-go zone. Yet there was a crashing sense of inevitability about the scenes we saw unfold today. And while the left will defend every minority except the Jews, tonight they're back on the streets. If you ever doubt that Jews don't count has become a reality, then look at the scenes of spit-fleckled Hamas sympathisers raging across London, Manchester, Edinburgh and Birmingham this evening. And it's not just the UK. Here in Washington, chants of "globalise the intifada" echo around protests in squares. Well, enough is enough. This has to stop. But how do we do that? Tonight I'm going to be joined in the studio throughout this evening by the Free Beacon's John Levine. And we'll talk in a moment to Will Geddes, security expert. But first, John, this is the intifada globalised, right? This is what...
It's sad, Harry, because I just... How many times do we have to watch the same movie over and over and over again? And we've seen this in other parts of Europe. It really wasn't in England until relatively recently. And as you said, now there's 4 incidents a day happening in your country. And what makes it doubly sad is it's an entirely self-inflicted wound. I don't think Jihad was a long-term resident of the United Kingdom.
Well, he says a man of Syrian origin.
Syrian origin.
Is, you know, with the police, you never quite know how they word these things.
I don't think he came over with the Norman conquest.
Right.
And
yes.
So you have imported this highly destructive, dangerous population into your country. And I just checked before I arrived on the show, the Islamic population of the United Kingdom has doubled since the year 2000 to present day, and it's entirely they're brought in as migrants. And I don't know what possessed the United Kingdom to do this, except probably why the United States brings in foreign immigrants is because of labor considerations and all that, and big business wants cheap labor. But you have to think about what cost to your society this does, because if this continues, if this population continues to grow and you see these kind of attacks continue, it will fundamentally destroy your country.
Stay there. Stay there. I'm going to speak to Will Geddes now, security expert. Will, are you there?
I'm here, Harry.
Good evening. Listen, talk us through how the day unfolded, and what the mood is like, the tension is like in the Jewish community this evening. Given the blunt nature, should we say, of this attack, meaning it's almost impossible to stop.
Yeah, so, I mean, really, let's take you through from the events and how they commenced today, Harry, and I'll give you a quick rundown. At about 9:31 this morning, there was a gathering, obviously, at this synagogue in Manchester. It's a prominent synagogue. There were a number of people there to celebrate Yom Kippur, which is obviously a major, major event for the Jewish community, and it's an event that they celebrate every year. And this individual turned up in a small vehicle, a Kia. He rammed one of the people outside, who was a security officer, as I believe. He then disembarked from the vehicle. He debussed with a knife and then started stabbing 4 individuals. 2 individuals have died as a consequence. The rabbi, amazingly, and his actions probably saved the vast majority of the congregation, who thankfully were already in the synagogue. He pulled the doors shut to prevent this individual from getting any further. About 4 minutes later, Harry, armed police turned up very rapidly. You couldn't ask for a faster response than that. Within a minute, they identified who the threat was and they shot him the first time. About a minute later, when he tried to get back up again, they shot him again. Now, the individual was carrying, as we've seen before on the London Bridge attack, for example, a fake suicide belt, which looked as though he had IEDs on him. They have now been determined as having been inert. And inevitably, there has been subsequent investigations. There have been 3 arrests, and there are 4 people currently in custody. Of the individuals that were targeted, the 2 that didn't die are currently being treated in emergency care right now. And as you mentioned, Harry, the individual has been named. He's of Syrian descent. They say he's a British national, but I would put some question marks over how long he's been a British national.
Well, he's not. He's not in any position to be suing right now. So let's talk about this guy. What else is there? Any other details we know about him beyond his extraordinary name? Should we say?
Well, yes. I mean, Jihad. Kind of ironic that is his first name. Very little is known right now. The authorities took their time to release it, and this name has only just come out, as you know, in the last few minutes as to naming the individual, because I think there will be consequences to the government in how they have been treating the whole situation, particularly, as you rightly said, Harry, with protests even going on tonight outside Downing Street by pro-Hamas supporters. And this is in the wake of our own Prime Minister turning round and stating that he recognised Palestine as a state. That is not playing into the hands of Hamas, if you could ask for it. I mean, it really is.
No, astonishing scenes across big cities and even small towns in the UK. They're saying it's about this flotilla that little Greta's been involved in again. But it's appalling. There's a big march planned on Saturday, I understand, through central London. Tens of thousands of these protesters, pro-Gaza, they like to put it euphemistically, protesters planning to take place. Why can the British government not just ban it?
Well, exactly. I mean, Palestine Action is one group that has been prescribed as a terrorist group. They're still out there. They're still proclaiming their individuals are still proclaiming their support, even though the penalty is that they could be incarcerated. But Harry, I don't know whether you saw the statement made by our esteemed London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, where he said he was going to do everything within his power to reassure the Jewish community, who understandably are very, very vulnerable right now and feeling very exposed. I think those words are empty, bearing in mind the number of pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas protests which are now still scheduled to carry on, as you say, this weekend.
Will Geddes, thank you for joining us on Harry Cole Saves the West. Astonishing there, John. The first reaction, I can't help but think, the death of Charlie Kirk 3 weeks ago, almost to the day, I believe. The outpouring of grief was through prayer. We saw those remarkable scenes in Arizona where it was more, it was a sort of very incredibly moving service. But people weren't taken to the streets and going around it. What is it about this movement in particular that seems to be so? I mean, the nicest way I can put it is that willfully blind to how they look. And the fact is, you think they'd have one night off, right, when people have just been murdered?
No, I mean, this is the ancient hatred. It goes back 5,000 years, and I think you're seeing only the most modern expression of that. And by the way, these people who were celebrating the death of Jews in your country, they were also celebrating Charlie Kirk's death as well. They might not have been as vocal about it, but Charlie was a friend to Israel. He was a friend to the government of Israel.
Well, let's talk to Eylon Levy, who I believe is joining us tonight from Israel, former government spokesman there. Good evening, Mr. Levy. Thank you for coming on this.
Good evening is one way of putting it, Harry.
Well, no, exactly. I was just going to say, not the circumstances. I tend to find we always end up speaking on days of grim news. But thank you for joining us. Jews around the world have celebrating Yom Kippur over today, and have been turning off their mobile phones and turning on the news this evening as the festival comes to an end. And what has the reaction been in Israel at this horrific attack?
I mean, this attack in Manchester is shocking, but it's not surprising. The writing was on the wall and everyone understood it was only a matter of time. It was only a matter of time because for decades, synagogues and Jewish schools across Europe have looked like fortresses with intense security around them. Communities are drilled with volunteers who stand outside on guard, because we've seen Islamic State specifically calling for attacks on Jews around the world, because Israel's own travel advice tells people if you go abroad, avoid showing any signs that you're Jewish, don't speak Hebrew, don't tell anyone where you're from. And the writing's been on the wall because we've seen protests around the world chanting, globalize the Intifada. Now, most people don't speak Arabic, but the Intifada was a wave of suicide bombings in Israel in the early 2000s. We've seen people on the streets of the West calling for political violence against Jews and Israelis, calling to import terrorism to the streets of the West. It's happened in the United States. We've had people killed. Now it's happening in the UK too. I can only hope the UK government gets its act together and understands the problem, so this will be the last and not the first.
Exactly. 2 people shot, I believe, in Washington not long ago, as you say, spreading across Europe as well. We've seen these kinds of attacks. The Israeli Foreign Minister tonight has had some strong words for the Labour government in Britain and the sort of mood music around the Jewish community that has become incredibly hostile. We've seen the scenes every weekend, every Saturday across Britain, these hate marches, which is what they are. And, you know, there was more controversy around someone calling them a hate march than the actual marches themselves. How does it look from where you're sitting, what has happened to London, what has happened to Washington, and what can be done about it? And are politicians to blame for creating this hostile environment?
Look, it's clear that there is an information war, a propaganda war that is being waged against Israel that seeks to depict it as a symbol of ultimate evil in the world. That's why they throw every nasty word in the rule book, genocide, starvation, apartheid, at Israel, to depict Israel as being like the new Nazi Germany. And if you depict Israel and anyone who is associated with it as uniquely evil, then you make violence to stop it not only acceptable, but moral. That is the purpose of the libels that have been launched against Israel and its supporters as it is fighting against Hamas and other Iranian proxy armies. It is a libel that is intended to make political violence against Jews and Israelis seem moral, seem noble. And that's why we're going to see people who are going to be praising this attacker as well, if they have the guts to say it out loud, because once Israel is seen as being the symbol of ultimate evil, and anyone who's associated with it, namely Jews, is seen as being complicit with evil, that lays the groundwork for political violence against them. That's why we need to hear the British government standing up more firmly against the crazy allegations being made against Israel as it's fighting against Hamas. Because when you allow those lies to get out of control, you legitimize political violence that has spilled blood on the streets of Britain.
How did it feel when you hear Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, say, "Oh, we're going to up security at Synagogue"? Surely that horse has bolted, so to speak. The Brits were among a number of the countries to recognise the sort of state of somehow recognise this mythical state of Palestine, despite it having no borders, no real population that you can actually define, and various other problems with it. Do you think what is the reaction to that, and can you draw a line in your view from directly from the response to recognising Palestine to the actions of today?
Look, an armed police presence is the last line of defense. It means that all the other defenses have fallen and you're really right at the last ditch. So that's not going to make many people feel comforted knowing that an armed guard outside is going to stop the attacks. We need to start much earlier. Look, let's look at one of the lies that is fueling hatred against Israel right now. The allegation that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza when it is fighting to bring down a terrorist regime that is literally threatening a genocide and that is still holding hostages in Gaza. We know that the outgoing Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, wrote a letter in which he said the British government's position is no, that's not what Israel is doing. That's ridiculous. Well, the British government needs to have the guts to say that out loud. While Israel is being accused of genocide shamefully at the ICJ, the British government needs to submit an amicus brief coming to Israel's defense and saying, no, this is ridiculous, and to say it vocally. Because when you allow those lies against Israel to spin out of control, then you allow people to feel that they are justified morally in using violence against either Israeli targets or Jewish targets. So I think the British government has a great deal of responsibility here in not standing up vocally and shutting down a lot of the information warfare and propaganda that has made the political atmosphere against Jews and Israelis absolutely toxic and has convinced many people, specifically on the left, that violence is justified morally in order to stop this.
Eylon, while I've got you, just on the broader developments we've seen this week with Prime Minister Netanyahu accepting the terms of fairly unpalatable terms, I'd say, of the Trump peace deal at the White House on Monday. Any sign of Hamas coming to the table? I mean, it's remarkable, isn't it, that people have been, these same people that are marching through the streets tonight have been calling for a ceasefire for 2 years, yet when the ceasefire is put on the table, they go, well, hang on, not that ceasefire, we don't want that one. What's the expectation of how it's going to play out? And in your view, are Hamas going to come to the table?
Right, isn't this crazy? It's the first so-called genocide in history that people don't actually want to end. And that's because they know it's a war, and it's a war that they want Hamas to win. But Israel has won this war. Hamas has lost, and the terms that President Trump has set out are terms to end the war with Hamas's surrender, okay? It's Hamas admitting that it's lost this war, and it should never have started it in the first place. Now, I hope that international pressure will be brought to bear on Hamas through its patrons, Qatar, Turkey, who will tell it, game over, there's nothing left to fight for. If you reject this deal, the US is going to back Israel in hunting you all the way in Gaza. But I think we need to be ready for the possibility that Hamas is going to say no, because it's a suicidal jihadi death cult. And if it says no to this term to end the war, then the UK government's position can't be pressure on Israel to end the war anyway, even if it leaves Hamas free to plot the next war, even if it leaves Hamas with hostages. The response has to be, we've said Hamas has to go, and we're going to stand firmly by Israel as it does the world's dirty work and does this the hard way, to remove Hamas so it can never again launch another war and drag the whole Middle East into another cycle of violence.
Eylon Levy, thank you for joining us tonight. And one day,
thank you, Harry.
We will have a conversation.
One day I'll come on
for big news. One day, yeah, exactly. Well, I hope so. Hope so soon. Stay safe.
One can dream.
Thanks,
Thanks, Harry.
It's remarkable there. I mean, it couldn't be clearer there, John Levine. It all but said, the British government has blood on its hands tonight.
I'll tell you, the current situation reminds me of an earlier unfortunate era of British history, the era of appeasement. And it's a word I keep coming back to because obviously... Very good point, well made. We see Keir Starmer recognizing a Palestinian state, which is not for any use of statecraft. It's entirely to appease restive domestic populations that have emerged in the UK in recent years. And as we saw from appeasement in the 30s, you don't actually arrest the problem, you embolden the evildoers. And I think you can draw a direct through line from this attack on this synagogue to recognizing a Palestinian state. And there will be more, and it will not just be in the United Kingdom.
Well, let's talk about the political ramifications for all of this. Lord Walney is joining us from London. He's a former independent advisor on political violence, expert on this sort of horrible days. Lord Walney, good evening. Extraordinary allegations there from Eylon Levy that the British government has basically got blood on their hands tonight. The climate around Israelis and Jews in Britain is pretty, it's pretty grim. I mean, not to sugarcoat it. Can I get your response to that?
Look, Eylon is right to highlight the level of distress that Jews in Britain and Israelis have with the current conduct of the UK and the West. And I really hope that this is a turning point, because I take absolutely as genuine that when Keir Starmer stands up, when Shabana Mahmood says that they will do whatever it takes to keep Jewish communities safe. And I know that they recognize and understand that in terms of physical security. And I know there will be another conversation now about what can be done to help keep British Jews safe, in the knowledge that I think has been tragically reinforced this morning that if you have a fanatic who has access to a car and a knife, then it is very hard for them to be able to be stopped. But the bigger question, I think, is the one that Eylon set out really eloquently there, which is, what are we doing as a government, as a country, in step by step turning away from Israel, making them out to be uniquely out of step, and putting them close to now being in pariah status in the international community? When, look, there are terrible things that are happening in Gaza, and there's a valid conversation about whether Israel's action is proportionate. I know that if it had been us, if that massacre had happened on our shores and we had an existential threat next door, we'd be pretty tough.
Yeah.
But I recognise that question is there, but where we have taken this is now fueling the anti-Semitism.
Lord Walney, I think we both know what's going on here, though, don't we? Because if you look at what happened to the Labour Party at the last election, yes, it won, but a lot of its most senior cabinet ministers are hanging by a thread in their constituencies. They are seeing off Gaza independence and Muslim candidates who come very close to taking out politically some very senior members of the government. This is politics, isn't it? That's why the Israelis have been abandoned. That's why the government came in and made the sort of moves towards selling technology to Israel. It's why the BDS movement is allowed to grow in the UK. It's why you have former colleagues of yours in the Labour Party. Take Wes Streeting, for an example. He's been on a bit of a journey, hasn't he? He used to be one of the most pro-Israel voices in the Labour Party and in Parliament, and now he's pivoting to attacking Israel. And why? Because he's got a majority of less than 1,000 in his seat, and he's under threat from a pro-Gaza independent. This is raw politics, isn't it?
There is genuine distress about what's happening in Gaza. The raw political element that you talk about is clearly an important factor, and it is grubby and it is wrong and it needs to stop. But I think there is another factor here, and that is the scale of debasement, I would say, of the United Nations. Because when you are the Labour has come in and wanted to renew its the United Kingdom activism within the UN as a political party on the centre left, that we love the idea of the United Nations. We really believe in it, and we thought that the Tories had done the wrong thing by setting themselves aside and by isolating themselves through Brexit. And so there is a current within the UN that you just cannot get on in that organisation.
Well, it's riddled with anti-Israel fanatics, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, these rapporteurs aren't exactly, people say, oh, it's a UN report, it can't be biased. It ranges from a talking shop to a extremely anti-Israel sort of movement.
Absolutely. It has been fundamentally changed, and there is different levels of countries basically playing the game. And I do think there is an element that that Keir Starmer and the Labour government is wanting to keep in with France and President Macron, and now he has his own domestic issues about needing to seem pro-Palestinian, and he wants to show leadership within the EU, and he has pushed this recognition deal, which does nothing to bring justice and a viable state for Palestine, but it shuts the UK and France out of negotiation, and it emboldens the extremists at home. And I hope now that there is a moment where actually my friends in the Labour Party, they don't want this. They do genuinely want to stop the hate and the persecution of Jewish people at home. I hope that this is a moment when they will actually listen and understand now what is happening here and are prepared to take its course.
Lord Walney, a final question before I go. These scenes of these hate marches across the country, they're back tonight. There's a big one in London planned for Saturday. Do you think it should go ahead? And what can the government do to avoid looking like they're siding with the rights of people to put fear of God into Jews?
No, I don't think it should go ahead. The legal framework at the moment means that it probably can. What I think the government should do is accept the recommendation in my report, which is still sitting on their desk, and one of the recommendations is to allow the police and the Home Secretary to take into account the cumulative disruption to communities, to look at the way in which the Jewish community is being torn apart over a period of months, and certainly now is suffering to be able to stop those marches.
John, that's John. Lord Walney, I'm going to have to. We're going to have to leave it there. We're going to go to break. But thank you for joining us on Saves the West. After the break, we'll be carrying on this discussion all the more. Anti-Semitism in the West is on the rise. Welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West, where we're still discussing the horrific scenes in Manchester, England this morning, where 2 Jews were killed outside their synagogue on one of the most holy days of their calendar. John Levine from the Washington Free Beacon is still with me. Some remarkable guests we had there in the first part. Before we get into the sort of wider cultural anti-Semitic problems around the West, Lord Walney there, who's a former government advisor, Eylon Levy, who's a former Israeli government spokesman, very clear that ministers should bear responsibility for this. A fascinating point I thought there at the end where the failures of the UN were put on the table by Lord Walney. I know it's an issue dear to your heart. It is a bit of a farce, isn't it? That
it's a lot of a farce, I would say.
Yeah, and is that point over? In some magical, mythical world, would we all be able to get on if we had a proper way of talking?
The idea that the United Nations has any business telling a country how they should defend themselves from a genocidal death cult that wants to kill them all is ridiculous. And Lord Walney mentioned proportional response. What is the proportional response for you if your family is raped and killed?
Yeah.
What is your proportional response? You have to destroy the evil completely. There can't be a tiny speck of it left alive at the end.
I mean, that's the problem is that Israel faces, is because they've been trying to do that while also fight this information battle that the guests have mentioned. At the same time, being unable to, they may well have taken the senior leadership of Hamas out, 3 times now? 3 times over, but, the Kalashnikovs are still going into kids' hands, right?
I'm sorry the kids are getting jazzed up with TikTok and social media, but the fundamental fact remains Israel has an obligation to defend the lives of their people. And if you're living across the street from this cancer, you don't negotiate with cancer. There's no ceasefire with cancer. You have to kill it or it kills you.
Do you think, what's your take on this? We saw the Netanyahu move on Monday. There was still no sign from Hamas on that. Do you think they'll come to the table? Eylon Levy there didn't sound too.
It's Hamas. So, my gut is always don't assume they're going to come to the table. And even if they do, don't assume they'll come in good faith. But what's different this time is you have all the Arab countries buying in. You have Turkey and Qatar and Egypt being like, look, guys, we're on board with the deal. So they're going to be able to exert a lot of pressure on Hamas. And they're truly isolated and alone this time. So we'll see. What did you make of
Lord Protector of Palestine, Donald Trump, being actually in charge of the Gaza Strip under the terms of and a return for Tony Blair?
Lord Protector of Palestine. This is just like in the 30s and the 20s when we had the British commissioner. It's funny. I'm more optimistic about the peace plan than Douglas Murray was. I mean, obviously there are some unpalatable things, but I broadly like it if Hamas agrees to the terms. They're out of government. They're disarmed. You get some kind of...
The mask has really slipped with some people, isn't it? Because they're saying, well, there's no place for Hamas in this deal. It's like, well, hang on, you're saying the quiet bit out loud now. We all knew that...
Now suddenly, it's a genocide, but let's keep it going a little longer. Right.
Let's bring in some more guests. I think down the line we have Jake Wallace-Simons, author and former editor of the Jewish Chronicle and friend of Harry Cole Saves the West. And we have also Sarah Cock from the Foreign Affairs Professor. Jake, to you first. I'm sorry again to be talking to you, as I've said to Eylon Levy before the break, in such awful circumstances. Can I get your response to what's happened today, and the remarkable admission there from Lord Walney, I don't know if you heard, who essentially agreed that ministers in Sir Keir Starmer's government, Sir Keir Starmer himself, this government, have blood on their hands.
Yeah, I mean, this was a crime, it turns out, perpetrated by somebody whose name is literally Jihad. You couldn't make it up. It's emerged this evening. But look, it's been a long day. The holiest day in the Jewish calendar began with that depravity in Manchester. And frankly, the response has been so dispiriting. I thought that I couldn't be shocked about the depths that people would go to, but actually it turns out there's always a further level of depravity because people, I think the worst thing about it really has been seeing people on the left who spent the last 2 years criticizing, smearing, frankly lying about Israel in the most lurid terms, seizing upon this moment as an opportunity to pose not as anti-Semites, to use this attack to express their condolences for the Jewish people as if they weren't encouraging this kind of hatred all along. And I'm afraid that Keir Starmer isn't completely in the clear for this. Don't forget, last week, Hamas were congratulating him on recognizing a Palestinian state. And today, he's decrying or lamenting a Hamas-style attack on our shores in Manchester. The two things rather don't add up, if you ask me.
I mean, obviously beyond the horrific sense of betrayal, what is the mood like tonight in the community, in the Jewish community? Yeah, there was, I have a horrible sense of a crashing sense of inevitability about this attack. Is there concerns that enough is being done? It seems to be that the British government all but outsourced a lot of the protection of synagogues to charities like the Community Security Trust. What is the mood like tonight, and what more can be done, do you think, Jake?
Well, there's so many emotions, I think, in Jews up and down the country. Firstly, there is, as I've said, that anger, a lot of which is directed towards the Prime Minister, who has spent the last year, at the very least, condemning Israel with all of his heart and soul and leaving Hamas almost completely unscathed in his rhetoric, and particularly recognising the Palestinian state without even asking Hamas to release the hostages first. That all is one big betrayal that's whipped up people against the Jews. He has a lot of responsibility for a lot of the hatred, I think. But also there's fear, of course, and anguish. Jews have been living with tight security for a very long time. I think it's unusual for people in the mainstream to know what living as a Jew today is like. There aren't very many Jews in Britain, what, 250,000 or so, less than 1% of the overall population. So many people don't know many Jews, and Orthodox Jews in particular live with tight security, almost like airport-style security at their synagogues, their schools, and elsewhere. I grew up in the Orthodox community in the 80s and 90s, and it was bad then. There was security at synagogues then. And my school had several bomb scares. We had to be evacuated. We had thugs coming round. I had a physics teacher called Mr. Paget, who was an ex-copper, who marched people out when they came to have a go at us. That was happening then, and it's only got worse since. And it seems to peak every time Israel is called upon to defend itself against jihadism. That's when it really lifts its mask and people come out and try to attack Jews in this country as a kind of excuse. So people are used to that, but the fact that this was a deadly attack makes people feel very concerned indeed. We're used to living with this threat, but this has taken it to a different level.
Sarah Knock, Foreign Affairs Professor, thank you for joining us tonight. Do Western governments have a responsibility for the scenes we've seen today? And do you believe the sort of geopolitical machinations we've seen in the last few weeks have betrayed Jewish communities in their countries?
Absolutely, they have. As you said, the Western governments are really the leaders of the Western world, but they're also, they have the funding, they have the military, and the influence in places like the UN. And so they are the leaders, and they've completely shirked their responsibility on that front. And this is what you get when that happens. We have to be the ones who stand up for civilization, who stand against terrorism, or it's going to come to our shores too.
I want to play all of you a clip and get your response. This is Bob Villan, who, some people will know from Glastonbury, where he led a chant of death to the IDF. But let's see what he's been saying recently.
Get out there and fight them. Get out there and meet them in the street. Get out there and let them know that you do not stand by them. Do you understand me?
Get out there and fight them. He's talking about directly attacking Jewish people in the street. Jake, how have we got to a situation where, this is not just normalised, but cheered on by, people who would otherwise consider themselves incredibly progressive, good, moral people, drugged up kids at Glastonbury cheering and joining in death to the IDF. And look at that crowd. We're delighted by what Villan was saying. I know everyone's got such an appropriate name today, Bob Villan.
Yeah, I think it's something to do with being on the left. If you have the misfortune to be on the left, then you're likely to be on the wrong side of this argument. There's a sort of worship of your own virtue, of your own self-righteousness that goes on, where you have the monopoly on all goodness. And the Jews, unfortunately, have been cast by the left after decades of Soviet-inspired propaganda. The Jews have been cast as the agents of capitalism, the agents of so-called colonialism, even though Israel is one of the greatest anti-colonial states in history, and are seen as white supremacists and all the other smears and slurs that we've had for decades. And so the left sees them as the enemy, sees Jews as bad, Israel as bad, as the enemy. And the more radical they can be against the Jews in Israel, the better they feel about themselves. So really it's a way of performing their own virtue, performing their own politics. And also I think they see it as a kind of anti-establishment position as well. They see the Jews in Israel representing the British establishment, the West as a whole, Western democracy, all the things that they like to rail against in their kind of adolescent steroidal hormonal fit, you know. I think it's an expression of that. It's like a massive tantrum is what it is, and no one more tantrumy than Bob Villain. Sadly, it got very, very serious today when it mixed with, apparently, again, apparently, with Islamism. You know, in Israel, they are saying that this attack was directed by Hamas. We don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they're saying over there. This does seem to be very sinister. When you have tantrumy woke people meeting Islamism, it's a very deadly cocktail indeed.
John Levine, what can they do to Israel and Jewish communities in Western countries? What can they do to fight back on this information war?
Well, you know, it's funny. Israel definitely is losing the information war.
As Charlie Kirk,
I was just about to say that.
Wrote to Netanyahu himself in the weeks before he died.
Unsolicited advice to Netanyahu in the weeks before his assassination, saying, look, you know, what I'm hearing on TikTok, what I'm seeing among the kids that I talk to is very disturbing. And he laid out, you know, I think a 7 or 8 point plan being like, here's what you need to do. And one of them was having sort of college campus style events that he does with people. And he's changed so many hearts and minds on so many issues. And people said, Charlie, don't go on college campuses. They're too crazy. You won't be able to reach them. And he said, no. And he went there, and he's winning the argument there, and Israel can do the same.
Sierra Knock, Foreign Affairs Professor, still with us, I believe. Sierra, what can Israel do to turn this around? And you know, as John's saying there, they are losing this information war, unfairly or otherwise. What would be your advice, Professor?
Well, absolutely. They are definitely losing the information war, and they're a bit late to the game here in terms of, you know, trying to turn it around. They have, they recently signed a deal with an American media company to promote content on social media and find influencers and build up a, you know, public diplomacy campaign in that way. And of course, they're targeting the US because, you know, we're one of their most important allies, if not their most important ally. But I really think they have to go bigger. They have to look at Europe and what's happened in Europe, and maybe it's going to be harder there. But it's, you know, it's integral to them, you know, maintaining their stance in the world, because you do have all of these tides that are turning against Israel through these disinformation campaigns. And of course, it's one thing to blame the media and blame the mainstream media, but, you know, Israel has to be out there providing the facts for people to push back on as well.
Final point for Jake Wallace, Simon, sorry. This march planned for Saturday through central London. We're seeing violence, you know, outside Downing Street tonight. They're clashing, protesters clashing with cops. This is going to be, if I can swear, is it after 10 o'clock in the UK, possibly? It's going to be a bit of a S show, isn't it?
It is indeed, and we've seen actually Palestinian protesters on the streets of London and indeed elsewhere in the country this evening in the wake of this horrendous anti-Semitic murder, the worst that we've had in quite some time in Britain. They've been, you know, out on the streets, bringing the transport system to a halt at Liverpool Street Station and elsewhere, waving their flags, clashing quite violently with police. You know, take a step back and you look at the Israel protests, they're always peaceful and well-behaved. The Palestinian protests have a tendency towards violence, and there's only going to be more of it.
Well, let's both of you come back and talk to us again about that after the weekend. I suspect we know what those scenes are going to look like. Right, don't go anywhere. After the break, we will have a slightly lighter debate, I think, but we'll talk about reform, and we've got ourselves a magician. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West. Remember, for a great exclusive content, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Harry Cole Saves the West. Right, well, a heavy evening and a sad evening, but maybe perhaps some lighter debate now with Jonathan Brown, former COO of Reform UK, a clear Nigel Farage ally, and his sidekick, Archie Manners. I mean, how do we even describe Archie Manners?
Magician, I'm like Cher or Adele. I'm just
magician to the stars, and a man who's done some consulting work for Reform. And John Levine from the Washington Free Beacon is still with us. Jonathan, just with you used to work at the MOD. You're a security expert as well. Can I get your reflections on what happened today, just before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely appalling day for the Jewish community. What I would like to see now, and we've talked to a lot of your guests talking about this, Keir Starmer needs to actively condemn those who support this, and also, frankly, the Gaza protests, the sheer insensitivity of people rioting outside Downing Street.
Do you think they
after
should be?
an attack like
do you
this.
think they should be banned? The march should be banned on Saturday.
Yes, yes, I do, and they are very willing to ban right-wing marches. So this gaslighting we've been having over the past, frankly, year, in which the threat is from the right, prevents the counter-terrorism specialists, must focus on the right wing. The threat's always been what it has been since 9/11. It's from radical Islam, and we have let that breed and breed and breed in this country.
The threat is indeed from Islamism, but there's been a lot of focus in the sort of security world, in the sort of woke security world, that actually this idea of right-wing terrorism is as bad or as equal to the threat of Islamism. This just doesn't bear out, does it?
Not at all. I mean, it's been absolute.
Why do our security services feel the need to be so, right on?
I mean, frankly, because they've been penetrated by DEI, and the outgoing chief of the MI6, Richard Moore,
flew the trans flag on the James Bond's headquarters.
And not just that, he has essentially blocked any white man becoming into a senior position under his leadership. He has said that explicitly.
Yep.
It's a double thing. They've been captured. They've been captured.
There was amazing. I'm going down a tangent here, but there was an amazing advert they put out on Instagram for recruiting to MI6, where they said, "You might well think that the best and brightest graduates of the UK were running the security services. That's not true." And they were saying it as if that was a good thing. Archie, is this some astonishingly harsh words for Keir Starmer tonight from Lord Walney there, from Eylon Levy there tonight, from John Levine as well. This is going to become a political issue back in London, isn't it? And rightly so, right?
And so it should be. The Telegraph are reporting now that this guy came over as a child. That now seems to be confirmed. So he was born in Syria.
So failed by the British state, no doubt.
Well, I mean,
to steal John Levine.
It's amazing.
It was society which
they went through the
failed
checklist
Jihad.
of, should this guy get citizenship? At no point did they go, his first name's Jihad. Shall we have another look? Anyway, it's going to be a major problem. And I think Jonathan was talking about the marches. It seems to me that just out of common sense and decency, the organisers should postpone it, right? Whether you ban it or not is a separate issue, but just out of decency and respect.
I don't think we've seen much decency and respect on those marches. Oh. Gentlemen, you both worked closely with Reform in various capacities. Archie, you just made a very good point in the break that Reform are the only political party left, really. I think the Tories would probably dispute this, but that in mainstream political party in the UK still giving full-throated support to Israel.
Absolutely. They are the only party that is still doing so. Richard Tice, the deputy leader, was there only last week. And they are, frankly, the only option, I think, left for the Jewish community. And that's not necessarily a great thing for Reform. It's more, in my mind, a sadness of the state of British politics, that the other parties are not ready or willing to stand up.
Well, again, but also, I mean, it has become a sectarian political fighting point, right? In seats, Wes Streeting seats, Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary's seat, there are a number of Labour MPs where if they're not being threatened by Reform to lose their seats at the next election, they've got these Gaza Independents, which is such a wonderfully euphemistic name for the political party, breathing down their necks. Do you think for Reform there is electoral, and without getting too gritty, electoral potential in supporting of Israel, or is it going to put voters off?
I think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Actually. I think that it's for them, it's civilizational. They've seen the threat the Jewish community has been under now for decades, and they are doing the right thing and standing up and saying, no, we will not put up with this. And they are the only people willing to do that. I actually don't think it is an electoral leverage for them, actually.
Yeah.
I think, there's probably reform supporters on both sides. It's never been the biggest issue.
Well, given that there's the scale of the reforms vote at the moment, if the election was held tomorrow, I think the last poll showed they would have more than enough of a majority in the House of Commons to govern. You've both worked closely with reform, and I'd love to get John's perspective as an outsider. Is Nigel Farage ready to be the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Archie?
Yes, I think he probably is. I think we're a way off in terms of policy development and the party generally. It's a long way off an election, but, you know, the combination of Nigel Farage and number 10, Harry Cole saving the West, there is hope. There is hope out there, ladies and gentlemen.
Charm will get you nowhere.
We've got Harry
Charm will get you nowhere. Jonathan, do you think he's ready?
Yes, I do. I mean, you've got to remember Nigel's been a politician for 30 years now.
Yeah.
And he has campaiggned against enormous resistance to the establishment.
Is the party ready? Have they got the funding in place? Have they got the money? They've got to find 400 odd candidates and MPs. Candidates has been where they get things wrong sometimes. You know, there's been some wackos that have slipped through the net, so to speak.
The example is, a year ago they were on 12%, now they're on 35%. So have they got everything in place yet? Of course not. But they've made absolutely enormous strides to get that ready. Yeah. And then you get a spectacle. Look at the Labour government, right? Major party. God help us. But they're a major party. They knew they were going to get into power. They essentially let one person, Sue Gray, look after their entire agenda.
For American viewers and friends, Sue Gray was a lifetime bureaucrat who they just thought it would be a good idea to put in charge of a political party.
Yeah, and I had a very good friend, not on my political persuasion, who I was in university with. She was in the cabinet office, and she said they thought Sue Gray was doing the plan.
Yeah.
Sue Gray wasn't doing the plan. No one asked her.
Exactly.
So the idea to criticise reform, which has done nothing but build up its expertise, its policy offering over the last year, is it ready at this moment? Not quite, but it will be.
John Levine, you've tracked the rise of Donald Trump, the rise of MAGA. Do you think the Brits are seeing a sort of similar shaking up of the system?
Absolutely, absolutely. All the same ingredients are there. The building of this hurricane is coming, and a very serious indicator that I look at is how big Nigel Farage is on Cameo.
Well, he's huge on Cameo.
And he's everywhere, and you cannot run into a British Zoomer. And I, American, did not really appreciate
Nigel will like this. Which camera? Go to Nigel's Cameo, pay $75.
Well, hang on. Nigel Farage can plug his outside interests when he comes on this show.
George Santos asked for like $400. It's a bargain.
I am actually Cameo's most expensive talent. I joined Cameo and I made it £500,000 in the hope that someone would get drunk and book me by accident.
How's that going for you?
I recorded no cameos.
And you didn't even bring your magic tricks, your deck of cards. That's terrible.
Your one USP gone.
I'm gonna before this show completely falls over, I'm gonna flip it around a bit. Right, you say Nigel Farage and Reform are ready-ish. Nigel's ready to be PM. Reform will be ready to run the country apparently in a couple of years' time. Is the country ready for Nigel Farage? And Jonathan, with your long distinguished career in the British state, we saw what happened to Donald Trump. In his first presidency, the deep state were not ready for Donald Trump. Did everything they possibly could to make that known publicly. And I keep being tempted to swear tonight. I'm not going to do it, but mess him up a little bit. Yeah. Is the deep state ready for Nigel Farage?
The civil service is a deep state. Who knows? But the civil service has been thoroughly saturated in the whole DEI agenda over the past 5 years, in particular. Right at the top, a lot of civil servants have used it to get to the top, frankly, to advance their careers. It's going to be a shock when that goes. I think that's going to be the biggest shock. On the other hand, civil servants are very used to flipping their minds when governments come in and out.
Yeah, but nothing never seems to change. And that's the thing. The problem is that the Tories had 14 years trying to get stuff done, didn't go well, got tonked. Labour come in, promising change. Within 6 weeks they're going, oh God, these Tories guys were right about this. It is chaos. Nigel Farage, theoretically comes in, pulls all these levers, nothing happens. That's when things.
He's going to do things differently. Your point about whether the public is ready for him is a very good one, because he's not going to do the traditional leadership that we've seen so far. He's talking about appointing people to cabinet who may not necessarily be MPs. Yeah, it could be members of the House of Lords, which would.
Yeah, having Scott Bessent run the U.S. Treasury, is slightly better than having someone who's never actually run a fund, run a large amount of money.
So it's going to be a different system, I think. It'll be something we haven't seen before in terms of how he governs.
Yeah, and there's also the plan is developing in place, looking at what you do first 100 days. I think the great thing about Nigel is he's coming in after we've seen what happened in Trump's first term and how different it was in Trump's second term. So he knows to learn those lessons and be ready. Also, we've seen the disaster domestically of Liz Truss, the former UK Prime Minister, one who lasted less time than a lettuce.
Enough time to write an excellent book about it.
That is a by Harris book.
One for the connoisseurs.
If you've got a wobbly table, it really is the right...
excellent book, but yeah, that's a lesson.
As the only American at this table, I'll just say, I think the UK is ready, but only if you can learn to love yourselves again. And I feel like the United Kingdom, much of Europe is caught in the grips of a self-loathing of Western culture and who you are, and all of the amazing contributions of the United Kingdom and of the British Empire that was ended slavery in the world and was one of the most civilizing forces on earth. And don't run away from your history and don't run away from your heritage, I beg you, as an Anglophile.
Thanks, sir. Well, we're definitely going to clip that bit up, aren't we? Jonathan, we saw, Trump, at that point you made there about Trump too. He came in, he had 200 executive orders ready to go. He moved fast and broke things. He said, he said what he was going to do. He did what he said he was going to do before the election, which is quite a unique thing to have in a politician. What can Nigel Farage learn directly from Donald Trump?
I mean, Trump had the benefit of the first term,
yes,
where a lot of stuff did not go the way it was, and you had the deep state essentially obfuscate and gum up the works everywhere. Bureaucrats, by their nature, are about gumming up the works, and someone like Nigel, they're going to pull every trick in the book to prevent his agenda from going through, and you have to follow what Trump has done here and blow past it.
So, gentlemen, you both know Nigel Farage well. Does he know the scale of what is going to happen? Do you have any idea how raging the BBC, the Guardian, the Third Sector, the charities, all of that lot are going to be at the prospect of a reform government?
I think, frankly, if you've been Nigel the last few years and been attacked across the board from all the establishment, it's all you know, frankly. I think he knows absolutely the challenge to face.
The sense of responsibility, from what I gain in conversations with him, is dawning too.
Well,
he really might now be Prime Minister.
He's famous for his fags and booze and laddie image. Yes, he's still got a lot of that, but he's not. I don't imagine he's.
He's starting himself up a bit. He said, "We're not."
I don't imagine lunch with Nigel Farage is like lunch with Nigel Farage 20 years ago.
No, it's not. Thankfully.
Do you think is he getting the right amount of support around him and the right advice around him?
I think so far so good. Right, the polls are doing very well. So.
And do you think that this government will go all the way? Because he seems to suggest there could be an election sooner.
I think the government will go all the way. Whether Starmer goes all the way at the top of it is a very different question. But I'd be surprised, and I may end up regretting this, I'd be surprised if there was an election.
Never make political predictions, but they'd be mad to go to the polls now. They are so unpopular. They're going to push it right away, I think.
Guys, we'll have to John Levine, thanks for joining us today. Jonathan, Archie, right, well, a horrible day, but a little bit of light relief at the end. There we go. Don't forget to subscribe on Harry Cole Saves the West on YouTube, and I will see you on Monday. Thank you very much for watching.